All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brittany Millinger. I'm the Fair Housing Training and Outreach Coordinator for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. And this afternoon, you're attending PHRC's Fair Housing and Power Hour series. And our session today is going to focus on fair housing for families. I want to note a couple things before we get started. This session is being recorded, and you will get access to the recording after the presentation is over. I will also send out all of the slides so that you have all of those notes and resources as well. So you can expect that via email within the next few days. I also want to note that we do have live captioning throughout today's presentation. So thank you very much to Emily for making sure that our presentation today is accessible. And there is a link in the chat box that will take you to the captions. I apologize, we were not able to get ASL interpretation for today's program, but we will be working to make sure that is in place for future sessions. So we always start out these presentations by talking about how important fair housing is. It's the right of everyone in Pennsylvania to be able to access housing free from discrimination. And PHRC puts a strong emphasis on that, making sure that everyone is able to access housing of their choosing. To give you an idea of our goals for today's session, we will be providing a brief introduction to the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission for folks who may not be familiar with us as an agency. Then we're going to lay the groundwork by talking generally about our fair housing laws, our protected classes, and discriminatory practices before we get into the substance of today's program, talking about how fair housing concerns can impact families and their housing and what our protections are. We will also discuss the complaint process at PHRC. If you feel like you've experienced discrimination, you are welcome to file a complaint at our agency, and we'll give you the details on how to do that. And most importantly, we'll have space and time to answer your fair housing questions. So I always leave some time at the end of the presentation if you have questions, but I also encourage you to put any questions that you have in the chat, and we will get to them as we're able. So I will be providing opportunities to answer questions and provide feedback in the chat. So please feel free to keep your chat function handy because we will be asking you to use that. Getting started with our agency overview, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission has been around since 1955. So this year is our 70th anniversary. We are the state's leading civil rights enforcement agency, ensuring that Pennsylvanians can live, work, and learn free from unlawful discrimination. So we do that through a two-part mission. So first off, we enforce Pennsylvania's non-discrimination laws, and that includes both the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act as well as the Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act. So if someone believes that they've experienced housing discrimination or discrimination in any of our other sectors, they can file a complaint with our agency and have that investigated by a neutral investigator to see if there is a violation of our state laws. But beyond simply reacting when complaints come in, we also proactively work to promote equal opportunity for all in Pennsylvania. We do that through programs like this. We also offer a wide variety of training programs that you can find on our website. We go out on site to organizations and agencies and community groups all the time and offer virtual trainings on request because we want to empower everyone with the information that they need about our state laws and protections. We have a really active civil rights outreach division that works to spread the word about our protections and engage with communities when they're experiencing civil tension and other issues. And we also have advisory councils and social justice ambassadors throughout the state as well. They are volunteers in our community that help people understand what their rights and responsibilities are and report back to PHRC when there are issues that we as an agency should be aware of. So there's lots of different ways that we're out in the community, and I'd be happy to talk with you further about any of those if you have any questions after the presentation. We serve the entire state of Pennsylvania, and we do that through 3 regional offices. So the western part of the state in the dark blue there, that's covered by our Pittsburgh regional office. The central part of the state up into the northeast, that's covered by our Harrisburg regional office. And then the southeastern part of the state in that medium blue is covered by our Philadelphia regional office. The regional offices are do the work of day-to-day complaint intake and investigation and adjudication. And then we also have a central office located in Harrisburg that does a lot of the outreach and administration functions of our agency. I mentioned our two laws, and I just want to provide a quick overview of what they cover. So the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act covers employment, it covers housing, commercial properties, as well as public accommodations such as services at businesses or local governments, other offices, as well as primary and secondary education up through high school. The Pennsylvania Fair Educational Opportunities Act extends that education coverage into post-secondary education. So colleges, trade schools, technical schools, and educational settings like that. But of course, we only have an hour together today, so I want to dive into our fair housing laws. You can always find more information about our agency at our website if you're interested. I want to start off with the goals of fair housing. So we talk about fair housing as having two goals at PHRC. So the first one, ending housing discrimination, making sure that discriminatory treatment isn't preventing people from accessing housing opportunities. But beyond that, fair housing exists to promote diverse, inclusive communities as well. We call that affirmatively furthering fair housing. So acknowledging that in our country, housing laws and policies and practices have excluded groups of people for long periods of time, and that's built up systemic inequities, which means that there are a lot of barriers for many Pennsylvanians today to be able to access the housing that meets their needs in an area of their choosing. So we need to do more than simply prevent discriminatory practices, which we'll be discussing today, but we also need to be looking at ways that we can all contribute to a Pennsylvania where everyone can access housing opportunities. So what do our fair housing laws cover? They cover the sale of housing, the rental of housing, as well as housing-related transactions. Now, a lot of folks intuitively know what selling housing and renting housing, what that looks like, but housing-related transactions can be a little bit murkier. What we're talking about here is looking at appraisals of a home, at the ability to get insurance for a property, at the ability to get a mortgage, right? All of these services and industries that can impact one's ability to get housing and to be able to access fair services as well. The types of housing that are covered by our laws are broad. It's anything from apartments to single-family homes, manufactured housing communities, condominiums, public housing, nursing homes, dormitories, and more. Even some types of shelters are covered by our fair housing law. And I want to highlight two discrimination theories or two types of discrimination. The first one is disparate treatment. So that's treatment that directly discriminates against a member of a protected class. So we're talking about fair housing for families today. So let's look at familial status. So that could be an advertisement that says, no kids allowed, adults only. That's treatment that's directly against a member of a protected class, and it's denying them the housing. Disparate impact, on the other hand, is a policy that looks neutral on its face, but it has that disparate or disproportionate impact on members of a protected class. So looking at families with children in them, it could be a policy that has only one person per bedroom, an occupancy policy that's likely more restrictive than your local occupancy standard. And if it doesn't have any legitimate non-discriminatory reason, that could have a disproportionate or disparate impact against families with children, keeping families with kids out of those housing opportunities. So that's what I mean, the difference between disparate treatment and disparate impact. I see a question in the chat about 55 and over communities, and we will get to that in just a minute. Great question. All right, I want to talk about our fair housing laws. We have fair housing laws at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. So at the federal level, there's the Fair Housing Act of 1968. There's also Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the ADA. And those second two laws provide additional protections for individuals with disabilities. At the state level, as I mentioned earlier, it's the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act that forms the basis for our protections. And then there are over 70 different local municipalities and local governments that have enacted additional ordinances to provide even further protections. So the federal laws really provide the basis or the floor for our fair housing protections, but we have additional protections at the state level, additional protected classes that aren't reflected at the federal level. And then localities have even further protections that they have enacted. And that looks different at any in different communities. I'm curious if there's anyone on the call that knows of a local human relations commission that has additional protected classes. If they could identify that in the chat, I would love to hear about that, since I know that there are often additional protections that are enacted through these local ordinances as well. I want to talk briefly about housing jurisdiction while you're putting comments in the chat. So let's talk about who's covered by our fair housing laws, who needs to abide by our fair housing laws. At the federal level, with the Fair Housing Act, housing providers who have 4 or more properties need to comply with our fair housing laws. That is, unless they publicly advertise their vacancies or if they receive federal funding. So even if they only have a few properties, if they're advertising their vacancies publicly, or if they get federal funds to support their housing, they need to comply with our fair housing laws. It's a little bit simpler at the state level. There isn't that exemption for 3 or fewer properties. So housing providers with 1 or more property need to abide by our fair housing laws. And the filing timeline also looks a little different at the federal and the state level as well. So if you want to file a complaint based on the Fair Housing Act with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, you need to file that within 365 days of the date of the last harm, so within 1 year. You have a shorter time frame to file with PHRC for violations based on the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. Those complaints need to be filed within 180 days of the date of the last harm, so about 6 months. My next slide has the protected classes, both at the federal and the state level, but I always like to see how many we can identify in the chat before advancing to the next slide. So if anyone knows of any protected classes, please feel free to put them in the chat, and let's see how many we can get from the group's brainstorming. Now keep an eye on the chat to see what folks are able to put in there. National origin, thank you. Yes, national origin is a protected class. Any other protected classes that folks are familiar with? Race, yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Color, age, yep, age 40 and above. Sex, absolutely. Religion, yep. We've got most of them. There are a couple more though. And I know I've got a couple colleagues on the call that, let's see, individuals with disabilities, absolutely, that's a big one. Gender identity, yeah, we're going to get into that under the protected class of sex, absolutely. All right, you guys did a great job. Let's take a look. All right, so you'll see 2 columns of protected classes on this slide. The left one is protections under the Fair Housing Act at the federal level, and there are 7 of those. So there's race, there's color, national origin, there's familial status, religion, sex, and disability. You'll see that those are closely mirrored on the right-hand side of the screen under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. So that covers race, color, national origin, familial status. We term it religious creed instead of religion, sex, and disability, but we also add on age 40 and above, We add on ancestry, as well as the use, handling, or training of support animals for disabilities as well. So let's talk about familial status as a protected class. It's defined as families with children under the age of 18 who are living with their parents or legal custodians. It includes people who are pregnant, and it also includes people who are securing custody of children under the age of 18. And that includes foster children, and not just biological children. So I think it's important to note that it's not just families that currently have children in the households, but it's households that may include children in the future if people are securing custody of those children. Now, as was a question in the chat, there are some exemptions for housing for older persons, and that's because of the Housing for Older Persons Act. You can find the specific act at the link at the bottom of the screen, and I do want to just issue a quick reminder that you will receive these slides with these live links, so you'll be able to find more information after the presentation. But this Housing for Older Persons Act creates exemptions that are based on age. So these are types of housing that are specific for older adults, and they're able to limit households with children who live there. So the 55 and older communities, I want to focus on first. So those are a little bit broader. So the requirements for these communities are that 80% of the units must be occupied by at least one person who's 55 and older in order to maintain their status. So there just has to be one person in the household, and it doesn't have to be all of the units. But they do have to advertise and market as being 55 and older, and only one resident needs to be 55 and older. However, there can be age limitations that are placed on other tenants. And the housing provider can deny residency and or access to facilities and services to children and those who are under 55. However, they do need to be consistent in the way that they apply their rules. Now, 62 and over communities are a little bit stricter. So they do need a certification from the government. You need to be age 62 or older to live there, and no one under age 62 is permitted. So that would naturally exclude children. Now, there are some situations in which someone younger than 62 would be able to live at a 62 and over communities. I don't have it listed on the slide here, but I'm curious if anyone could identify that in the chat. Why might there be someone younger than age 62 living in a 62 and over community? So a spouse might be in a 55 and over community because they're a little bit more flexible. But yes, there could be a caretaker for someone with a disability. Absolutely. So there might be a reasonable accommodation by an individual with a disability who need to live in caregiver. The individual with the disability would be 62 or over, but that caregiver may be younger, and that care would be needed for that individual to be able to use and enjoy their housing. So thank you so much for everyone who responded with ideas in the chat. I want to also discuss sex as a protected class under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. So when you looked at those lists of protected classes on the screen just a moment ago, you didn't see LGBTQ listed on there, you didn't see sexual orientation or gender identity, but we do still have those protections in Pennsylvania. So in 2023, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission finalized regulations that defined the protected class of sex. And that definition includes pregnancy status, childbirth status, breastfeeding status, sex assigned at birth, gender identity or expression, affectional or sexual orientation, as well as differences in sex development. And we use those regulations as we accept complaints, as we conduct investigations, and as we adjudicate cases. And you can learn more at the link at the bottom of the screen, which takes you to our website, where we've got a link to the regulations. We also have an excellent fact sheet that was put together by a director of communications that provides more information about what those regulations do and how that protects individuals in Pennsylvania. So I want to just emphasize that even if there are changes in the federal environment around protections around sexual orientation and gender identity in housing, we do still have these regulations in place. So if you do believe that you've been discriminated against in your housing because of your gender identity, because of your sexual orientation, any of these factors, you can file a complaint with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission under the protected class of sex. And the last protected class that I'm going to go into more detail about is disability. So that's defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of a person's major life activities. Examples of this include caring for oneself, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, or working. It's not an exhaustive list, but just a list of examples of how a disability might substantially limit one or more of a person's major life activities. Now, our fair housing laws protect those who have a disability, those who have a history of a disability, as well as those who are regarded as having a disability. Now, the first one is intuitive and it makes sense. You know, those who have a disability that would qualify under that definition have protections against disability-related discrimination. But there's also protections against people who have been treated unfairly based on someone else's perception of them, based on their knowledge of their history, or how someone regards them, particularly around disabilities that have a lot of stigma around them. Someone might be experiencing discrimination because of how someone else perceives them or regards them. And if they believe they would have received that unfair treatment, they can file a complaint with our agency and have that incident investigated. I do want to highlight that there are some exemptions here as well. So individuals who are currently using illegal drugs or controlled substances are exempted from disability-related protections. So this does not include those who are in active recovery. If someone is in active recovery, they would have fair housing protections, but if someone is currently using controlled substances or illegal drugs, they would be exempted. Additionally, individuals who pose a direct threat to the health or safety of others would be exempt from disability-related protections. So next I want to go into a broad overview of some discriminatory actions that take place in housing. We will go into a much more in-depth discussion about these in next month's Fair Housing Fundamentals. So if you want an exploration of discriminatory actions in more detail, definitely tune in next month for our April presentation. But we just have a short list today. So discriminatory statements could be no kids allowed, or a discriminatory inquiry for someone who's seeking to rent a home. So, oh, hey, do you have any kids in your family? To inquire about someone's protected class when making a decision about their housing, or perhaps inquiring for an expected parent to see if they're going to go back to work when they after they have the baby, and making a decision on whether to give them that money based on that assumption that perhaps a mother wouldn't go back to work based on a new child in the family. Could be steering to a particular area of the complex, a specific building, a specific floor, or even to a specific neighborhood based on the familial status in that household. So flat out refusing to sell, lease, or finance housing, providing an unfair appraisal of the value of the property, predatory lending. So that's looking at the terms and conditions of lending money for a mortgage. Discriminating in the housing terms and conditions, so that the terms of the lease or the sale of a home or of the mortgage. Unequal provision of services and facilities, looking at the maintenance services that are provided or the areas of the facility that someone might be able to go to, as well as harassment. And it can be sexual harassment or harassment on the basis of any other protected class. Harassment is not simply related to just based on someone's sex. And then lastly, refusal to provide reasonable accommodations and modifications. This is specific to individuals with a disability who need that accommodation, that change in policies, or that modification, which is a change to the structure of a building in order to be able to use and enjoy their housing. So if you'll recall, we discussed that a couple minutes ago when we were talking about having a live-in caregiver. That's an example of a change in policy that allows someone to be able to continue to live and enjoy their housing in a way that meets their needs. So we're going to talk about familial status discrimination, how fair housing violations can impact families that have children. So first up, we've got discriminatory statements, and that's defined as printing or circulating statements indicating a preference or a limitation related to protected class. So you can see some examples here: mature adults preferred, perfect for empty nesters, and great for singles. Now, you don't see an example that says no kids on here, but do you think that these statements might impact households with kids, or households with an expected parent in there, or households that are seeking to obtain custody of a kid? Do you think they would feel welcome in this property? Or do you think there might be some subtle or not so subtle messaging about households that might have kids in them? Well, I'm not seeing any responses in the chat, but I will just say, okay, I see a response. This is definitely subtle, you know. But these terms are used to designate who's preferred in a household or in a housing property, and who might not be preferred. By saying that it's great for someone, or perfect for someone, or someone is preferred, you're also saying who isn't preferred, who it's not perfect for, and who it's not great for. So a good practice is to describe the property itself, not who you think would be a good fit for the property, because we certainly wouldn't want to be sending any messages to members of any protected class limiting their housing options. So it's important to examine any statements and advertisements if you're a housing provider to make sure that you're not having an impact on individuals in protected classes. Next, I want to talk about occupancy standards. So this can be a complex topic, but it certainly can have an impact on families with kids. So we did mention that at the beginning of the presentation as we were talking about disparate impact, because households with children are more likely to have more members in the household. So local governments do have the ability to set occupancy standards limiting the size of the household by unit size. There are no federal occupancy standards. This happens at the local level. But housing providers should not restrict beyond what those local occupancy standards set without a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason. So these standards are set for safety, but housing providers should not restrict beyond to go to an even more restrictive occupancy standard unless there's a legitimate reason on why that is necessary. There is some federal guidance on that. It's known as the Keating Memo, and that is linked on the screen. And that's some guidance that HUD put out back in 1991, but it's still referenced today, looking at how a housing provider should look at housing for families and what's an appropriate unit size for a household. So it sets 2 persons per bedroom as a general standard, but it also explores some complications and some considerations that should be considered as we're looking at those occupancy standards. So looking at the size of the unit. Is it a very tiny 2-bedroom, or is it a large 2-bedroom? Are there additional rooms and spaces that are in that unit that would impact the family's ability to be able to comfortably live there, and to consider that? So I encourage you to take a look at that for more information. But while we're talking about occupancy standards, it's important to note that an unborn child or infant should not count towards the number of residents in the unit. So young infants are typically sleeping with their parents in that bedroom, and they should not be counted as needing a separate bedroom when they are very young. And housing providers should not require that children of different sexes to stay in different rooms. That should be a decision for the family to make, not for the housing provider to make. So housing providers should not be setting different standards for households that have 2 girls in them versus a girl and a boy. Households should be looked at equally there. I do see that there's a question in the chat about what age does a child count towards occupancy. I have not been able to find any specific information on that, but I will certainly pass along more specifics if I'm able to locate that. Next, I'd like to talk about the practice of steering. So real estate agents, leasing agents, or property managers may not steer households with children to a certain floor, areas of a building, or a property. So oftentimes when looking at steering, it's often discussed in context of safety. So is it safe for a child to be on the top level of the building? Is it safe for a family with children to have a unit with a balcony? But that safety is the responsibility of the parent to decide, not the housing provider. So safety concerns are not a reason for a housing provider to refuse to share all housing options to a household. And if a real estate agent, a leasing agent, or a property manager is asked about school districts, they should refer a prospective resident to reputable data-based sources, not offer their personal opinions. It's always safer to refer folks to an external website that you know has reliable information about that. That way you're not inserting your personal opinion into the discussion. All right, next we're going to talk about lead exposure, since this is a significant consideration, especially in Pennsylvania. So we are one of the states with one of the oldest housing stocks in the country, which means a greater proportion of our housing does have lead-based paint. So that used to be used in residential properties before it was outlawed in 1978. Now, lead-based paints can be harmful to children under age 6. It can also be harmful to older children and adults in significant concentrations as well. But the primary populations that need to be most concerned about this are children under age 6 and people who are pregnant as well, because it can be harmful to a child who's in utero. And it can cause developmental delays. It can cause serious cardiovascular, liver functions. It impacts a whole number of bodily systems, and it can be really problematic for young children. And once this exposure has happened, once this lead poisoning has happened, there's not a lot that can be done to remediate those health impacts. So it's important to catch that on the front end. However, this is not a reason that property owners can prohibit families with children from renting properties that have known lead-based paint hazards. The responsibility is to disclose that to households, to let them know that this is an older property. It was built before 1978. If they do have documentation stating that there is lead-based paint on the property, they should let families know that, but it's up to the family to make the decision. There certainly are federal and state and local resources that may be available to help remediate some of this lead-based paint hazards, both in rental as well as properties that are owned by a homeowner, and those might be available to help assist. But these housing opportunities should not be denied to a family based on the age of the property. Now, there are things that households can do to remediate those, to lessen those risks. Even if they can't do an official remediation and repainting of the unit, they can monitor for chipping paint. and dust that's happening on friction surfaces, such as in a doorway or on a window, things like that. And households can make sure that they are consistently wiping them up, since a lot of households don't have a lot of opportunities for housing that's affordable to them, especially in the tight rental market and the expensive rental markets that we see throughout the Commonwealth today. So even if a household knows that they are in a place that has lead-based paint, don't have a lot of viable options, there are still things they can do to protect their family through regular cleaning and maintenance, as well as looking into other resources that might be available to them. All right, the last way that I want to cover how discriminatory practices can apply to families includes the use of facilities. So this is specifically looking at multifamily properties that have common facilities. And housing providers should examine their rules and their policies to make sure that they're not unfairly restricting households with children from being able to use these facilities. So some examples here on the screen. No child may use the pool without direct supervision of the parent, or no bicycles or toys may be kept on the porch. So these are both policies that are going to specifically impact families with children. Since they'll have the child in the household that would use the pool, or a child that might be playing with toys, and having those toys in the property. So as a best practice, the policies should be crafted to address the problematic behavior and the safety concerns, but not the protected class. And you should always be looking for the least restrictive way to craft your policies, to specifically look at behavior and safety and not be focusing specifically on children. So, for example, let's look at the example with the pool and that policy. So that might be overly restrictive, right? There's a lot of youth that are certified to be lifeguards, that are very proficient swimmers. So a policy that restricts all children under the age of 18 is likely to be overly restrictive. So it should be rewritten in order to be less restrictive, still preserving safety, but not having that unfair restrictions that apply disproportionately to families. All right, next we're going to transition to talk into the complaint process. So that starts with contacting our offices, and there's a number of different ways that you can get in touch with us. You can call our main number. You can also get in touch with any of our regional offices. All of those numbers will get you in contact with our intake team, who can help you talk with you about how to get started in the complaint process. If you prefer email, there's also our email on the screen and our website, which does have forms that you can fill out and send in as well. This slide does also have social media on there, which is a great way to keep up with what we're doing in our events and other ways you can be a part of PHRC's work. Now, I want to take a second to focus on language and citizenship. So PHRC does not ask questions about citizenship or documentation, and we will not report any complainants to immigration enforcement authorities. So oftentimes it can be a challenge to interact with governmental agencies if there are concerns about citizenship. But I just want to reinforce that everyone has fair housing protections in Pennsylvania, regardless of citizenship. We also have telephonic interpretation services that are available for someone that calls in, if someone needs assistance with filling out forms and intake appointments. We do have that available in a wide range of languages. I encourage folks to take advantage of that. We also have our questionnaires available in both English and Spanish. Additionally, there's a function on our website which will allow to translate the content of the website into a variety of different languages. As I mentioned just a minute ago, if someone believes that they've experienced housing discrimination, their first step is to connect with our intake team. So they'll be asked to fill out a housing questionnaire. So that way they're providing their contact information, what they experienced, as well as who they're filing a complaint against. It's a pretty simple form, and the goal is just to get that key information. And then the intake team will assess their information to see if this is a situation that we can investigate under our state laws. So if this complaint is jurisdictional, so if it is related to Pennsylvania in the areas that we work based on a protected class, and if it's timely within that 180 days from the date of the last harm, then the intake team will be able to help them finalize that complaint, and then the person who is filed against it will be notified. So just a quick note on terminology, we call the person who's filing a complaint a complainant, and the person who's responding to the complaint a respondent. So you may hear me use those terms throughout the rest of the presentation. The complainant will be asked during the investigative phase to provide information to a neutral investigator who's responsible for investigating if there was a violation of our act. I want to emphasize that because sometimes people feel that that their investigator is not advocating for them, but an investigator's role is to be neutral, to assess if there is a violation of our act and to see the facts of the situation. They may do this through asking for documents, interviewing witnesses, holding a fact-finding hearing where they bring both parties together, sometimes going on site to a property, as well as seeking other ways of obtaining evidence. We also have a stellar mediation team here at PHRC, and they may be able to help mediate depending on the facts of the case and depending if both parties agree to mediation. So this can be a great way to resolve a complaint quickly and confidentially, but it is entirely voluntary, and both parties do need to agree in order to go to mediation. But the investigator, even if someone doesn't go to mediation, they will also explore if it's possible to settle the case before coming to a finding. If the case does proceed to a finding, there are two possible outcomes. So either probable cause or no probable cause. If probable cause is found, that means that there was enough evidence discovered to determine that discrimination occurred. No probable cause means that there was not enough evidence to lead to a finding of discrimination. So in the case of no probable cause, if there wasn't enough evidence, that's where the case pretty much ends unless someone decides to appeal that decision. But if probable cause is found, then that case may proceed to a conciliation, it may advance to a public hearing, or it may be filed in court. And at this point, our agency is no longer neutral. The goal for PHRC is to seek a remedy for the discrimination that occurred. And there is significant variation in the amount of time that it takes to investigate a case. It's really based on the evidence, how quickly both parties respond, as well as other factors, but it can take some time. So what are potential remedies that can be achieved through a housing discrimination case? Why would someone file this and go through the process? Well, in the case of a disability where a reasonable accommodation or modification was denied, that accommodation or modification can be granted, enabling that person to continue to live in their housing in a way that meets their needs. Sometimes there are changes to a lease or other policies from that housing provider that are required to be changed. So that way both the complainant, but also other tenants of that housing provider have their policies and are not subjected to a lease or a policy that has discriminatory practices in there. Oftentimes there are postings of fair housing notices, as well as training for respondents, ensuring that they have a full understanding of our fair housing laws. There are also monetary remedies that are available. So it could be reimbursements of fees and out-of-pocket expenses that occurred because of the discrimination or because of the complaint process. There's also money for humiliation and embarrassment. Now, this is specific to how housing and commercial property cases at PHRC. This isn't available in our employment our public accommodation or education cases. But this is similar to pain and suffering, and is in response to the impact that this discrimination had on a person's life. Lastly, if a case proceeds to a public hearing, there may be civil penalties that are assessed as a violation because of the violation of our state law. Now, there's significant variation in terms of the housing awards, but you can see some listed here on the screen. Anything from the top one of 1.5 million, where a housing provider failed to provide accessible units and ignored requests for reasonable accommodations for tenants with disabilities. There was a $100,000 case in which a maintenance worker sexually harassed a female tenant. $90,000, where a housing provider revoked a lease and failed to address neighbor harassment that was based on race. And then $77,000, where a housing provider made discriminatory statements and refused to rent to a household based on familial status. So you can see we do receive complaints based on familial status, and this was an award on the basis of that. We are about at the end of the presentation, so I do encourage you to start thinking of questions that you might want to put into the chat, but I want to provide an overview of some resources that you have for further learning. So we have a Pennsylvania Fair Housing line that you are welcome to call. If you have a fair housing question, definitely let us know. We've got trained staff that are available to answer that and can point you to fair housing resources and information. We do have fair housing training programs, as well as a variety of other training programs that are on our website. That link will go right to our website. And you can take a look at what we have to offer and what might be beneficial to your organization or your agency. You're part of our monthly housing webinar today, our Housing Empower Hour series. We will be sending out our next quarter of trainings for April through June, along with the follow-up resources and the slide and the recording from today's presentation. So you'll have that. You'll be able to register for upcoming Empower Hours if you're interested in doing so. We also have brochures and fact sheets that you can download from our website or request that they be mailed to you. We are always looking to get our information out into the hands of folks that need it and want to learn more. So please let us know if you need any brochures or fact sheets from our agency. We host a program on PCN TV that's called PHRC Speaks Fair Housing Forward. This is an interview show where we talk with experts, community leaders, PHRC staff, and commissioners, a wide variety of housing stakeholders about the real issues that are impacting Pennsylvanians in their housing today. And you can take a look at our archive on our website or on our YouTube page, or you can tune into PCN the first and third Sunday of the month at 3 o'clock. And lastly, we published a report called The State of Fair Housing in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's our white paper. And it's a look at the real barriers that are facing Pennsylvanians to be able to access fair housing and what we can do about it. So I encourage you to check that out if you'd like to learn more. And I'm going to put in a shameless plug for our 2025 Housing Equality Conference that's coming up in just under 2 weeks. That's out in Pittsburgh. For the folks on the call that are joining us from the western part of the state, it'll be on Tuesday, April 8th. We still have a couple tickets left. So if you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you be a part of the conversation that day. And I'll send a link out for that as well. And we are now at the question portion of the presentation. I think I was able to answer all of the questions throughout the course of the presentation, but please feel free to put any additional questions that you have on here. While we're waiting for additional questions to come in, I want to let you know that when I send out the email with the resources, I'm also going to send you a link for a survey. So we're always looking for additional feedback on what's helpful about these Empower Hours, what you'd want to see going forward. It gives you an opportunity to sign up for our Fair Housing newsletter if you're interested in getting quarterly updates from our agency on fair housing resources. And lastly, that will have a link to a certificate for you. So you'll be able to put your name in and download it and have that for your records that you did participate in today's program. So keep an eye out for that as well. All right, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat here, but I encourage you, if you have questions about familial status and housing or any other fair housing questions, please feel free to put that in the chat. All right, I see a question about currently passed federal policies impacting housing as we know now. My focus today is really on our state fair housing protections. So we still have strong protections through the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act, and our focus is going to be on enforcing our state laws. You may see changes in federal policy, and that certainly can impact the environment in which our housing is being able to be accessed by members of different protected classes. And we will continue to advocate for policies that encourage fair housing for Pennsylvanians. But I can't comment on any specific federal policies at this time. All right, I will stay on the line for a couple extra minutes in case there are any additional questions. But if folks don't have questions, you are welcome to go about the rest of your day. I'd like to thank you for spending your lunch hour with me for Fair Housing Empower Hour, and I encourage you to come back next month for our Fair Housing Fundamentals session. All right, I'm seeing no additional questions in the chat, and I see most folks are hopping off the call. So I'm going to close out today's session. Thank you so much again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.